Hello and welcome to Marketing Room 101, the podcast where I invite marketers to join me for a good old rant, and I give them the chance to banish one thing from the industry forever. I'm your host, Ben Norman, Strategy Director at Principles, and in this episode I'm joined by one of the top voices at the UK's top commercial broadcaster, Kate Waters. Kate is Director of Client Strategy and Commercial Marketing at ITV, where she moved to 7 years ago after almost a decade as co-founder and CSO at Now Advertising. My fantastic previous guest, Lindsay Clay, introduced me to Kate when I asked her who she thinks would make a fantastic guest, and she wasn't wrong. Kate's years of agency experience helping grow brands combined with the macro view of the industry she has now in ITV give her a really unique perspective. So here's my conversation with Kate Waters. Kate, welcome to Marketing Room 101.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you for coming in. So, Kate, could you please just set the scene for our listeners by describing what it's like in here inside Marketing Room 101?
Yes. So we are somewhere in a trading estate in a small town somewhere, probably on the outskirts of it, in a conference room with strip lighting overhead and probably a sort of really big table where you're sort of like two spaced out to be sort of comfortable, and probably drinking tap water, or if you're lucky, a kind of cup of tea. And you are taking a brief from a client who's got admirable, let's say, ambition and perhaps not a budget to live up to it. And you take the moon on a stick brief, which is the one that has got 17 objectives, a lot of must-haves, a desire for a media first and for a, like award-winning idea, but no, not the budget to match.
I'm trying to imagine this cup of tea, and I'm thinking it's probably UHT milk, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It's definitely UHT milk. Yeah.
I like the way you've phrased it as admirable ambition. I think that's one of the most positive ways I've ever heard anyone describe a client wants more than they can afford.
Well, I think ambition is good, isn't it? And there's always that sort of bit of you that thinks maybe once or twice in our careers we come up with brilliant ideas that don't cost very much money, that do match the scale of a client's ambition. So it sort of can be done, but it's, most of the time it can't. And that's really distressing. So, yeah. And then you just end up in that miserable loop of trying desperately to sort of reset their expectations and try and tighten the brief and narrow it and all of those sorts of things, which can sometimes work. And sometimes you just end up with something that's really average that tries to do everything and does none of them.
I think I've been in this room before, in this trading estate on the edge of this same small town. And I think it's always a red flag to me when someone says, well, we just want something like You've Been Tangoed. Just something that's dead simple, isn't it? Why can't we come up with something like that for us? And it'll be an office stationery firm or something.
Yeah. Or it'll be, so for a long time then it was that I just wanted John Lewis. So I'm just trying to work out what I guess the very modern version of that is. I guess the sort of mini epic, like sort of Waitrose Christmas film that they did or something like that might be a modern day version of it.
Yes. Okay, so we're not in the nicest and most pleasant scenario, but we will persevere. So, Kate, you started your career working as a planner in a few different agencies in the UK before setting up your own agency, Now Advertising, which you ran for about 8 years. You then left agency world to join ITV and lead their client strategy and planning function. Was that move from agency world into ITV something that you ever saw happening? And how did you react when that came about?
So the short answer is no. I would never have seen it happening. And that's largely because I'm not the sort of person who has ever planned my career. So I had no plans ever to set up an agency. I'm not sure that this shines a very positive light on myself, but I ended up setting up an agency because somebody rang me up and said, I'm going to set up an agency. I need a planner. I'd quite like to do it with you. What do you reckon? And I was in a job that I wasn't entirely happy with. And I was like, all right, nobody's going to ask me that very often. So that's the sort of thing I should just say yes to. And then when I had worked out that wasn't really going the way that I wanted it to, and I was feeling quite frustrated by that, and I knew that the agency needed real change, I started thinking about what to do next. And I didn't really know. And I took the best decision I have ever made in my career, which was to spend some money on a day of career coaching with a lady called Fiona Parashar. If anybody comes across her, she runs a leadership coaching company down in the West Country. And I spent 8 hours with her and she sorted me out. It's the only way that I can describe it, and got me to a place where I could think about, and I'd actually kind of figured out what was I missing? What did I want? What was I good at? What would be a few easy kind of next steps? And I kid you not, on the train home, I got a phone call from a recruiter who said, oh, I've got this weird thing at ITV do you fancy having a chat with them? And because I'd just seen Fiona and we'd sort of agreed that one of the things I would do was have a few interesting career conversations, I said yes. And that's how I ended up at ITV. But it was not, in some respects, it wasn't planned. It was kind of incredible serendipity. And it's been a fantastic move.
Do you think, had you not spent that day with Fiona, things might have turned out differently then when you got that call?
Yeah, because if I was really honest, I was in what felt to me, in my head, a really tricky bind, right? I started an agency. I was one of the 4 founders. I was a shareholder. I felt incredibly responsible for the 50 people who work for us, and there's always that fear, which is, you sort of think if you're a founder, you can't leave because it's your baby and because people rely on you and stuff. So it took me a lot of working through all of that stuff to realize that actually I wasn't really what the agency needed anymore. My vision for what I wanted to do wasn't aligned with what, some of the other founders wanted, and that actually I couldn't just kind of carry that weight forever. So yeah, that's what I mean. It was the best investment I ever made because it got me free of a lot of the shackles that I was putting on myself, and also, got me into a headspace where I could consider doing something else. And I've ended up in a place where I have the most amazing job. It's so different from what I used to do. I still do a tiny little bit of kind of keeping an eye on creative strategy, but mainly my creative strategists do a phenomenal job of doing that themselves. And because ITV is the size and the scale it is, I do all sorts of other things. I now understand a bit more about media, which I didn't when I was in a creative agency. I had no idea about how the media side of the business works, which is crazy.
I also think bringing that, I sort of find this day to day that if you treat creative ideation and media planning as separate things, it never leads to a better result, does it, as well? Like, I feel like if you can bring creative strategy thinking, however we want to describe it, into the world of media, into the world of broadcasting, you get such a different perspective, don't you?
Yeah, you do. But it's even, I guess it's even more fundamental than that. There's kind of creative strategy and there's media planning. And then there is the dark arts of how TV is traded and how, and the trading deals that are in place, not just with TV companies, but with all other media owners. And as a creative strategist, I'd never understood the implications of that. And I'd never understood the relationships that media agencies have with media owners. And so when I was in a creative agency, there was no world in which I knew how to work with ITV. I thought it was just a place where you bought airtime. And then, I came into ITV and I realized that there were these things called media partnerships. And there were all these really interesting things that you could do in that space, which I had no idea about. But I also had a much better understanding of how the whole process of planning and implementing and buying and trading airtime works and the economics of that. So I think from a commercial perspective, oh my goodness, running a creative agency is really difficult, but it's not complicated. But running a business like ITV, thankfully it's not my job, is really complicated, and just the bit that I work in is endlessly fascinating and full of nuance and strategy and tactics that are just a whole new world to me. So it's for somebody who is kind of endlessly curious and loves learning about stuff, it's just like the most wonderful playground.
So you've touched on there how much you've learned and how much you've potentially changed in the years that you've been with ITV. In the 7 years, you've learned and you've changed and you've grown. We also know that TV is learning and evolving and changing so fast. Anybody that works with broadcasters will know how quickly that's changing. So who do you think's changed more, or what do you think's changed more in that time, you or TV?
Really good question. I guess, so actually, I think maybe this is an interesting way to think about the answer to that. So the essence of me is still the same, but I have developed other interests and I have explored other territories and I have, I suppose, just put myself in different places and learned different things. And I would say that TV is really similar. So actually, at its heart, TV is the same. It's extraordinary content, that is professionally produced, curated by somebody who thinks about what that viewing experience is going to be. And ultimately, it services a human need for entertainment or for connection or for information or whatever it might be. Those things haven't changed. But what has massively changed, what has transformed, is the way in which that core product is consumed and the way in which, from an advertising perspective, the role that it plays and the way in which it's thought about. So I suppose, at our hearts, we're both the same. But what's changed is I guess, maybe how we manifest and show up.
What a brilliant way to answer that question. Yeah, well navigated. I suppose a big difference, and I've heard you mention this before, is when you work client side, you tend to work on one brand. When you work in an agency, you work on a few brands. You now work or have a view across thousands of brands at any one time. So you get this kind of macro view of what's going on in the advertising world. I'm interested to know, who do you think's doing this really well?
So I was thinking about this at a number of levels. Okay. So at a marketing level, at the most macro level, the brand that I think just continues to smash it is Tesco. So I think Tesco is an extraordinary brand because it is so huge. And I have a really soft spot for big mainstream brands that do marketing and advertising really well because it's really hard. It's much easier, I think, when you are a niche brand or when you've got a particularly premium brand or you're a challenger brand and you've kind of got a strong point of view on stuff. Tesco's got to be everything to all people. And they managed to do that absolutely brilliantly. And I think, because it's Ramadan, it's worth just shouting out their Ramadan work, which I just think is fantastic. I mean, that's how you do segmentation, is it? That's how you pick off a chunk of the population and talk to them in a way that is brilliantly engaging. And I love the fact that they do it publicly as well, that it's a kind of big statement about what Tesco is about as a brand and who it's for. So I think from a marketing and advertising perspective, they do it phenomenally well. I think from a general TV advertising perspective, I mean, again, kind of for a similar reason, I just endlessly love what McDonald's do. They've got such a strong sense of what that brand is about. I love, and actually I think it is for a similar reason, which is that they have to look at big insights, big underlying themes. A lot of the retailers have to do this. And I think the ones that are smashing it are the ones that manage to find that unifying thread that is incredibly mainstream and really engaging. And then when I guess you get into this sort of more specific kind of TV partnerships type space, we did some work last year with Google Pixel, which was around sport and about sort of giving a voice to female influencers in sport, which was called Pixel FC. And it was a really lovely campaign partnership, where we brought basically 20 sort of emerging female voices in that kind of influencer world into ITV, kind of talked to them with ITV Sport and kind of created content around it. And it was just a really nice way of pairing the brand values that we have as ITV and our expertise in sport with those kind of emerging voices, and Google bringing their, social digital sort of perspective through the phone into that. So that's a really nice example, I think.
I think what I like about those examples is none of them are just a one-off ad. None of them are used. Actually, I really like the ad that McDonald's did around coffee. It's much broader than that, isn't it? It's a more strategic approach to partnering with someone like IT or just to using broadcast media in general.
Yeah, but I thought, I think it's really hard to do this stuff well consistently. And that's why I admire those kinds of brands. And then I do also just love it when you see an execution that is just brilliant. So I can't give the game away, but I've just put together the shortlist for our Head First Award, which is it was where we give away some airtime to a brand that does the best job of essentially writing a campaign, but as executed as kind of 1 30-second ad to support the nation's mental health. And there are some absolute crackers in there. Brilliant ones when you go, that is genius. What a fantastic idea and how beautifully executed. So I think I will always love that craft of a really great TV ad. And when you pair that craft with the kind of consistency, there's something magic that happens, isn't there?
I like to think of it as if you buy one lottery ticket, the chances of you winning are low. And so you can never guarantee. But if you buy a brand like McDonald's or Tesco, they're constantly buying the lottery tickets, aren't they? So the chances of them having those standout creative moments are infinitely increased because it's a bit like the viral thing, isn't it? You can never guarantee that something's going to go viral, or you can never guarantee to a client that a TV ad is going to be shared all over the internet because people think it's brilliant. But you've got to do it in the first place to increase your chances of that happening. I suppose the last thought I had on that was what I like about what you've said about Tesco and McDonald's is I think they're brands that do incredibly well with using TV for brand building and for brand activation. And they're not interested in the nuance of those debates, are they, about whether one's used for one or one's used for another. McDonald's will do the secret menu stuff, or they'll do incredibly good brand building stuff. Tesco will do food love stories, or they'll do something incredibly creative to drive sales around Ramadan, like you say. It's a more nuanced approach, isn't it, rather than being in one camp or the other.
No, completely. But I think what those brands, is why I get so fed up of the conversations around TV is for brand building and, search and social is for performance. Because if you talk to any retailer, they'll tell you that TV works for performance. That's why they do promotional advertising on TV. So it's everything. And, we've been playing with this phrase internally, which is, we're not in the business of performance marketing, we're in the business of marketing performance. And I think that's our sort of mantra, which is if you work within TV, you understand how it works, you can do both of those things. And ultimately they combine to give you that overall performance that you need.
I love that reframing of it. I think that's really important. So I work with, so obviously we just mentioned a couple of large brands there that are investing in TV with ITV. I work with a few clients who've grown exceptionally well, partnering with ITV. Worked with Astonish Cleaning. They've grown incredibly well with ITV. Seabrook Crisps, the same. Ideal Boilers, clients that have done a good job through ITV. But I also work with probably more clients than that who just think we'll never have TV budgets. We can't go on TV. TV's not for us. So if we imagine for a second that I'm running a small brand and I've worked on my brand plans for next year, I've cobbled together a bit of a soup that includes a bit of social, some retail media, a bit of experiential. We've got a couple of events, maybe some tactical out of home and some PR. Why shouldn't I be ruling TV out? What would you say to me to actually don't just rule TV out because you think you've not got enough money because you don't have £1 million to spend on your media for this year?
Right. So let's see if I can give you 5 compelling reasons. You tell me if these, well, I've just picked the number 5 at random.
Hit me.
Okay. So reason number 1, bit of social proof. 50% of our advertisers spend less than £50,000 a year with us in media.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So there's a lot of other brands out there who don't have £1 million TV budget who spend with us. So that's reason 1. It is perfectly possible to do. And we can help that budget go further. So this is a kind of 1+ reason. We have lots of help and support that is available for first-time TV advertisers. So if you haven't been on TV before and you want to try it, we will put in place all sorts of support and incentives to try and make it easier that first time. So that's the first thing. We will kind of take some of the risk away. Second thing is that because ITV is basically a company that is made up of lots of smaller regional TV companies. So yes, when you advertise on ITV, you advertise nationally if you want to, but actually our transmission masts and all those sorts of things are regional, and we have to by regulation tells us we have to kind of keep that. So as a public service broadcaster, we have to invest in the nations and the regions of the UK, particularly around things like kind of news and sport and so on. But from an advertising perspective, what that means is that you can advertise in one region. You don't have to advertise everywhere. So if you haven't got a huge advertising budget, you can make it go a lot further just by picking one region, which is often where we would suggest people start, because what you can then do is just a very simple geotest. We will help you do it. We'll make sure that the data works and that, it's statistically robust and all those sorts of things. But you can look at what happens in the region where you're on air and compare it to the regions where you're not. And that's often pretty compelling proof that TV will work for you. And you can use that to kind of argue with your finance director for a bit more TV budget in the future. So that's Region 2. Region 3 is TV is not just for brand building. TV is for performance too, which is what we were sort of coming to before. I think that if I was being harsh about the TV industry, we have not done a good job of fighting the performance marketing narrative. And we've done an even poorer job of helping advertisers measure the impact of their TV advertising. So TV advertising works in loads of different ways. And if you measure it properly, you can see it has a short-term or near-term impact. So I think people often write it off because they think, actually, I can't afford the luxury of brand building. But maybe what you can do is justify it in terms of both that kind of near-term and longer-term perspective as well. What else can I say? Another reason to do TV advertising makes everything else work harder. So one of the most common effects that we see when people are on TV, this has happened to me. I've had a client ring up and say, something really weird is happening to my social CPAs. They seem to be going down. What's going on? To which the answer is, you're on TV. TV is doing a brilliant job of priming all of those people who are then seeing your social ads, and then they're converting. So TV is this kind of like fantastic sort of performance multiplier. It kind of lifts everything else really. And then I'd say reason 5 is if the cost of creative is off-putting, because that's often something that people say to us. Well, there are loads of ways around that now. So AI is really helping. If you're a small business, we can make you an AI generated ad for about £250. Now, it's not going to win you any awards. It might not be the ad that you want to run for the long term, but it's something to start with. And it means, again, that you can do that kind of media test and then, see where it goes from there. And if you want to spend a bit more, then, we have teams that can help with that. And obviously, if you want to spend with an agency, then there are lots of brilliant agencies out there who will do you a better ad. But sometimes for the first time, you want something that just kind of fills the space so you can get going. So there you go. Are those enough reasons? Have I convinced you?
I think so, yeah. I'm really impressed. I think to say that I didn't give you any time to prep for the answers to that. So I think, proof to the listeners that you actually know what you're talking about and that there are plenty of compelling reasons, because I also had a few reasons bubbling around in my mind. when I was asking that question that I think you could get to 10 easily, couldn't you? You can think about things like costly signalling, about attention over reach, about all shared viewing, all those sorts of things. But I think what you've really nailed there is that the cost of entry to TV possibly isn't what smaller brands think it is.
So the three barriers that get, called up on time and time again are the cost of it, both the cost of media and the cost of creative, the accountability of TV, and that's changing because of all the work we're doing around measurement. And then thirdly, the accessibility of TV, but as I've sort of talked about, we now have really great teams who only work with small and medium-sized businesses. And they are, they're like incubators. They're there to kind of really help and support and handhold and nurture all the way through the process. So we've been working really hard, I'd say, over the last 5 or 6 years to try and, really take away some of those barriers.
Okay, so the time has come. Let's not delay it any further. You are here to banish something from the marketing world forever. Could you please reveal, Kate, what you would like to banish?
Yes. So this is such a good idea for a podcast. I love this. And actually, I knew instantly what I was going to banish. So I am going to banish the concept of ROI, of return on investment. Okay. So this is probably quite a controversial thing to banish. Just for clarity, I am not banishing the notion of effectiveness at all. Yep. What I'm banishing is a metric that I think you can argue has done more harm than good in the long term. Because if you think about it, ROI is a measure of efficiency. And the single easiest thing you can do to improve your ROI is to do nothing at all. Because if you reduce your spend, even if you take your spend away completely, you still get some sales. So your ROI is going to go through the roof.
Infinitely, yeah.
Exactly, infinitely. So it is, I think, a metric that we have become kind of obsessed with. And actually, I did chat to Lawrence Green at the IPA about this, because I think the kind of history of ROI is a metric that people in marketing and advertising particularly got very excited about, was partly driven, not entirely, but partly driven by the requirement that the IPA put in place when you entered the IPA Effectiveness Awards, which was that almost like to have an entry that just passed the sort of basic hygiene level. You had to prove that there was a positive ROI to your campaign. And it was meant, with the best of intention, to sort of say, actually, we need to be a business that pays back. But I think we have kind of become obsessed with something and chased, increasingly high ROIs on stuff, which means that we just end up prioritizing and optimizing efficiency over effectiveness. So it goes back to what I was saying, which is that as a channel, as a medium, we want within ITV to be a channel that can say to our customers, when you advertise with us, you get marketing performance, you don't get performance marketing, because we're in the business of maximizing all of the returns that you get from your advertising and maximizing, the amount of money that, that comes back to the business, not just the efficiency with which it returns. So there you go. That's my impassioned plea for chucking ROI in the bin.
So you've been a planner prior to working within ITV. You've done this for a fair while now. So I think you'd be able to explain this better than I can. Can you just explain what you mean when you say the difference between efficiency and effectiveness? Because it's something that I think comes up quite a lot, and there's a lot of confusion between the two. But I think it's an important definition to be made here, because this is kind of the core of the argument, right?
So I think if you take two very different channels, right? So if you take broadcast television or outdoor, if we're talking about broadcast channels, right, they reach millions and millions and millions and millions of people. And because they reach millions and millions and millions and millions of people, the headline cost of them is quite a lot. So they cost quite a lot. Although, as we've talked about, you can, fiddle around the edges, you can advertise in a region, you can do all of that good stuff. You don't have to spend as much as you think. If you contrast that with channels that are more focused on a kind of specific segment of the audience, or, just have a kind of smaller reach, or you layer on sort of targeting, then you can, and if you work with particularly the kind of digital performance channels, then essentially what you're doing is you're talking to people, and you're often designing advertising for people, and you're targeting people that are in market right now. So there is very little wastage in inverted commas, but what you're doing often, I think, is, we can show this, is that you are reminding people to buy your product who would have bought it anyway. So the efficiency looks really good because you'll get a higher percentage of people who you are reaching who will click through, buy, whatever it might be. And so that looks really good from an efficiency perspective, from an ROI perspective. But ultimately, it's not going to help you grow massively. Whereas if you are using a broadcast channel, then you are reaching a lot of people. you're priming a lot of people, and a lot of those people might not be in market today, but they might well be in market tomorrow. So actually, when you look at the total effect of your marketing through those channels, the total effect will be greater than the small efficient effects that you get somewhere else. And that's the difference between effectiveness and efficiency. So effectiveness is about the size of the impact that you have. Efficiency is about the kind of the return versus the scale and the cost of that. And obviously, if you don't keep half an eye on doing things a bit, vaguely efficiently, then you can end up in a world where you get a big effect, but you end up having to plow lots of money, lots of time, lots of resource into it. But I think the danger is that the pendulum has swung too far the other way. And, the overall scale of impact that one gets from advertising is arguably smaller the more that people tend to kind of veer towards this world of performance marketing and too much focus on return on investment.
I suppose it comes to, I know Mark Ritson talks a lot about bothism and, you've got to utilise both, haven't you? We're not saying put the entire thing in the bin and walk away from it. But like you say, you've got to balance, to use both, but also acknowledge that if you really want to grow, you have to look at effectiveness over efficiency.
Yeah. And you need bothism. But people, I think, forget that return on investment is a ratio.
Yeah.
It's a ratio. It's one thing over another. So to our point earlier, the best way to improve that ratio is just to spend less. And I think the other benefit of throwing ROI in the bin is that I think it would make us think about effectiveness in the round. What are all of the things that we can do to maximize the effectiveness of what we can do? Well, we can really think about the power of creativity to drive that change and think about how brilliant that creative needs to be to kind of have that scale of effect. We would think much harder about where do I go looking for proof that my advertising is working, because I'm not just going to focus on one little metric over here. And the best IPA papers do this without a doubt. Maybe my advertising is not just working to attract new customers to my business. Maybe it's also having an impact on my staff. Maybe my staff are better motivated. Maybe that has an impact on retention. Maybe my advertising is, in one channel is having an impact on other channels. And, and maybe we would do a better job. And this is another, I guess, hobby horse of mine at the moment. We spend so much time worrying about sales, worrying about volume as a metric and as a measure of impact, and not enough time worrying about value. But arguably the single most efficient thing that advertising can do is to sustain or increase a price premium. Because if you're an advertiser, you eventually get that for free, don't you? There's no cost of sale in terms of raising your price. But there's so little work done to really understand that as a mechanism of how advertising works. So part of my desire for throwing away ROI is to get us to think about and ask better questions about what effectiveness is and how we measure it.
I think that's a brilliant way of summarising it. And I am convinced, and I will take ROI from you and I will keep it here in Marketing Room 101. How does that make you feel?
Very good. Very good. Does it get to live in the sort of slightly overhead glary lighting room somewhere in a trading estate or near a small town?
That's where it stays. Yeah. So people just go in there. Okay. People can visit it occasionally to go and just have conversations about ROI. But outside of that, it's gone. So while you're here, before you leave, is there anything that you would like to bring back to the marketing world?
Yes. So I don't know to what extent it was ever widely known, but the best definition of fantastic advertising that I've ever heard was given to me by John Bartle, who is one of the founders of Bartle Bagel Hegarty. And he described what great advertising should be as imaginative repetition, which I think is utterly and absolutely genius.
Perfect. Yeah.
I think, and it's so simple to understand in concept and so hard to deliver, but it sums up perfectly pretty much everything we now know, which I don't know if when John was founding BBH, there probably wasn't quite such a deep understanding of neuroscience and how brains work and, the power of attention and memory structures and all of that sort of good stuff. But imaginative repetition perfectly tells you how advertising works on the brain. And so I think, it's such a brilliant reminder. I've got it written above my desk at home because it's just such a fantastic, simple thing to remember about why we are here. What are we trying to do? What's the most useful thing we can do for our clients? Well, actually, it's imaginative repetition. That's what they need from us to make their brands work and to make their advertising work.
I think that's one of the best things I've heard on this podcast. I've never heard that phrase before. I talk a lot to clients about consistency and entertainment. And I think it just perfectly captures that sentiment, doesn't it? We're here to do something that captures attention, that creates feeling or an emotive reaction, however you want to describe it. But like you say, you've got to keep hitting the same nail every time. And I think The second you talk to somebody about consistency, they often turn off, don't they? Or you see like a bit of a glaze. Oh, so you're just telling us to keep doing what we're doing? Well, not necessarily. What I'm saying is try and aim to do what Specsavers have done over the years. Try and aim to do what Aldi have done. All these great campaigns that we look at, they're imaginative in the way that they keep repeating the same message.
And I think the other thing that's so interesting about it now is that, when John was probably first talking about it, there were only 3 or 4 channels that you had to worry about.
Yeah.
But now, we all know, that stat, which is, I think, 10 years ago, creators had to do 8 different iterations of a campaign. Now they have to do like 200, to fill all the various channels and sizes and shapes and stuff. And so that notion of imaginative repetition, I think, is even more important now because there's such a danger of fragmentation of messaging and also a kind of desire to sort of believe that your brand can be a slightly different thing to lots of different people. But actually, if you hold in mind that, you've got to do imaginative repetition and do it much better when your brand is showing up in so many different places so often. So I think it's still a really relevant mantra. It's harder, I think, to deliver, but even more important right now.
What you've touched on there, like I said, I talk to clients a lot about twin axis consistency. The idea that you have on the y-axis is place, on the x-axis you've got time. And you can't get the compound effect of consistency if you are not consistent in both the place that you show up, but also, across time. And I think what you just said there, you're right. If you've got 200 different assets to produce across a campaign, they might be worked on by different agencies, different teams. You have to have an idea strong enough, don't you? You have to have the imaginative part that's strong enough to be repeated across all those different areas for that long.
But even if you don't have, even at that level, even just at the level of having a strong brand colour or a logo or whatever it might be, even that, I think we sometimes lose track of, So I think it's such a basic reduction in a way of kind of what the business is all about, but at the same time, which is utterly genius because I just think it focuses on the stuff that we love, which is our job is to build these immensely powerful memory structures in people's heads around ideas or branded assets or whatever you might call them. But the genius of what we do, which is what is so hard to get right, is the imaginative bit. It's the kind of like, how do you do it just differently enough every time to make it noticeable, to make it engaging, to make it entertaining, but to keep reinforcing that idea that you want to be lodged in people's heads.
I love that. So I'm going to give you back imaginative repetition, and you can distribute that to all of the thousands of brands that you work with and the wider industry. So yeah, that's going to be a thing from now. So before you go, there is one last thing to ask you, and that's this week's Brothers question. So each week, my brother, who doesn't work in the industry, he comes up with a question for my guest. And this week, he wanted to ask you, Kate, when you were fresh out of uni and working on the Nestle account, you almost killed off the Milky Bar kid. Is there a TV or brand character you'd most love to kill now and one you'd most love to resuscitate?
Yeah. So I wrote about nearly killing off the Milky Bar kid as part of a campaign we did last year about 70 iconic ads. So it's called Living Room Legends, and one of them was the Milky Bar kid. And I talked about how I nearly killed off the poor Milky Bar kid. So I think I might, if I'm allowed to, pass on the which brand character would I kill, because I think that would not earn me many fans. But the ones that I would like to resuscitate, and I think they've never really been given enough of a life to become true brand characters, but I just think they were genius, were the singing oven gloves that Morrison's used in their Christmas campaign 4 years ago. It was my favourite Christmas ad of that year because I just thought it was, again, so simple, so brilliantly mainstream, so catchy, so funny, just based on a great insight about the thing that is used the most at Christmas time, and utterly and absolutely charming. So I think for a brand that maybe, I don't know if they would have a longer life, but one where you're basically saying, we have a place and a role in the kitchen doing the kind of hard work. I just thought that the singing oven gloves were absolutely brilliant. So I'd love to see them come back.
I'm trying to remember what song they were singing. It was great as a campaign, wasn't it? It was just such a, like you say, so simple. And maybe sometimes we think something's too simple for it to be able to just be rinsed and repeated over and over again. But I think arguably that's why you should do it, because it's so much you can do with it and it's so simple. But yeah, I love those oven gloves.
No, there we go.
So Kate, just finally before you go, how can people get in touch with you if they want to talk TV? And also, you do have some other roles that we've not spoken about with WACL and with Purpose Disruptors, in case you weren't busy enough. So would you like to just tell us a bit about how people can get involved with those too?
Yes, sure. So I guess if you want to talk about TV, then the best way to get hold of me is at ITV. So I am very simply kate.waters@itv.com. WACL is Women in Advertising and Communications Leadership. We are a network of just over 350 women in advertising and communications leadership. And we do lots of training and we do lots of events. And so it's kind of membership network, but there's loads of information online. We're always looking for people who want to kind of get involved in coaching and mentoring and all of that sort of good stuff. And Purpose Disruptors are a fantastic, really interesting, I guess, the industry activists on a climate perspective. So if you've got an interest in climate and sustainability and think that as an industry, we should be doing more to help the nation transition to a lower carbon economy, then I would strongly urge having a look at the work that Purpose Disruptors do.
Right, and I will include links to all of that stuff in the show notes as well. So, Kate, thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
So that was my conversation in Marketing Room 101 with Kate Waters. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, I'd love it if you could please just share it with one other person that you think would like it too. And if you've done anything recently to feel guilty about, for example, if you turned up too late to the cinema for the Michael Jackson movie so had to eat a full takeaway out of your backpack in the middle of a packed theatre, then you can cancel out that bad karma in just 30 seconds by giving Marketing Room 101 a 5-star rating wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, if you'd like to chat about how I and the Principles team can help you grow your brand, just drop me a message on LinkedIn, or to find out more about Principles, just head to principlesagency.co.uk.